Captain Danielle Carter had always been the kind of person who stood tall even when no one was watching. Growing up in a small southern town, she learned early that respect wasn't something freely given. It was something earned through action. Her father, a retired mechanic, used to tell her, "Do what's right, even when it's hard." Those words stuck with her through every decision she made, especially the day she decided to join the military. After 12 years of service, Danielle had returned home with medals, discipline, and the kind of quiet strength that came from leading people through danger. But the world she came back to felt different, slower, less certain, and at times unfair in ways she hadn't noticed before. People saw her uniform and smiled, thanked her for her service. Yet when she changed into plain clothes and walked through town, she sometimes caught that flicker of doubt in strangers' eyes, the hesitation that reminded her that not everyone saw the person behind the skin. Still, Danielle wasn't the type to dwell on unfairness. She poured her energy into work. During the week, she served as a security consultant for a local firm that handled contracts for schools and hospitals. On weekends, she volunteered with a community youth program, helping teens who were curious about joining the service or just needed someone steady to talk to. She loved it. It gave her purpose, a way to translate everything she'd learned into something that mattered at home. Her small apartment overlooked the city skyline. Every morning before sunrise, she went for a jog, rain or shine. It wasn't about staying fit anymore. It was about keeping her mind calm. Routine kept her balanced. The sound of her sneakers hitting the pavement, the smell of wet grass, the cool air on her face. Those things grounded her when the memories of war tried to creep in. She didn't talk much about what she'd seen overseas. Most people wouldn't understand. On this particular morning, she stood by her window sipping black coffee, watching the streets come alive. A school bus rumbled past, headlights bouncing on the wet asphalt. She smiled softly. Normal life, and that's what she wanted. But normal was tricky. After years of working under strict orders, civilian life sometimes felt like noise. There were no clear missions, no team to rely on. Just people rushing through days lost in their own chaos. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her friend and mentor, Sergeant Blake, who now worked with the local police department. "Morning, Captain. We've got another training session with the recruits next week. Think you can stop by?" She replied with a thumbs up and smiled. She liked Blake. He respected her, treated her as an equal. Occasionally, she joined the police training sessions to share tactics on quick decision-making and de-escalation. Most of the younger officers looked up to her, though a few made quiet remarks behind her back. "Military types think they know everything," she once overheard. She brushed it off. She wasn't there for praise. She was there to help. Later that day, Danielle drove across town to visit her mother, who still lived in the same house she'd grown up in. The walls were filled with old photos, her in uniform, her little brother on graduation day, her father smiling in the background before he passed away. Her mother fussed over her as always, asking if she was eating enough, sleeping enough, staying out of trouble. "I'm fine, Ma," Danielle said, laughing softly as her mother placed a plate of cornbread on the table. "You always say that," her mother replied. "You've been home 2 years and I still see that look in your eyes. The one that says you're carrying more than you let on." Danielle smiled but didn't answer. She'd learned that not every burden needed to be shared. Sometimes it was enough to just keep moving forward. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind the skyline, Danielle walked through the city park. Families gathered near the playground. Joggers passed by with earbuds in. Life moved as usual. She stopped near a bench and watched a group of teens skateboarding, their laughter echoing through the air. She thought of her youth group kids, the way their faces lit up when she showed them how to march or told them stories about teamwork. She hoped they understood that strength wasn't about power. It was about purpose. As she headed back to her car, she noticed a police cruiser parked near the curb. 2 officers inside were chatting, sipping coffee. She waved politely. One of them nodded, but the other barely looked up. She felt that familiar twinge again, the quiet reminder that no matter her rank or medals, she would still be judged differently by some, but she refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, she focused on what she could control: her actions, her values, her service. She believed deeply that change didn't happen through anger alone. It happened through persistence and example. When she got home, she opened her laptop and began reviewing a security plan for a nearby hospital. Her firm had been contracted to improve their emergency response procedures, and Danielle was in charge of evaluating their evacuation routes. She worked late into the night, cross-checking diagrams and writing recommendations. Precision had always been her habit. She didn't know any other way. As she worked, her phone buzzed again, this time a text from a young woman in her mentoring group. "Ms. Carter, I just got accepted into the Army program. Thank you for everything." Danielle smiled. That message meant more than any medal. She replied simply, "I'm proud of you. Make it count." Before going to bed, she stood by her window again, watching the city lights shimmer against the dark sky. She thought about her next steps. Maybe going back to school, maybe even joining the local police force full-time to bring some of that military discipline into the department. She knew there was work to be done, people to guide, systems to improve, but she also knew she needed rest. Tomorrow was another day, and life had a way of surprising people when they least expected it. She lay down, the quiet hum of the city filling the background. Her mind drifted back to the desert, the heat, the noise, the comrades she'd lost. She took a deep breath and reminded herself she was safe now. Home. She had made it back. As sleep began to take over, one thought lingered, maybe, just maybe. All her experiences, the struggles, the discipline, the strength, were leading her toward something she hadn't yet seen. Something that would test her again, but in a different way. And somewhere outside her window, the city moved on, unaware that the woman who had fought wars overseas would soon find herself in another kind of battle right here on home soil. The night deepened. Cars rolled by. Somewhere, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Just another sound in a restless city. Danielle turned on her side, exhaled softly, and whispered to herself, "Whatever comes, I'm ready." Those were the words she always said before facing anything unknown. They were her quiet promise, to stay strong, to stand tall, and to never let fear take her purpose away. The night had started like any other. Danielle had just finished reviewing some paperwork for her security job and decided to take a short drive to clear her mind. The city felt calm, washed in orange streetlights and the quiet hum of traffic. It was one of those evenings where people seemed to move a little slower, where the world felt peaceful for a moment. She parked near a small diner that stayed open late. It wasn't fancy, but it was one of her favorite spots. The kind of place where the waitress knew your order before you said it. Danielle ordered coffee and a sandwich and sat by the window looking out at the street. A few people walked by, wrapped in coats against the cool night breeze. For a while, she just sat there, listening to the low chatter of the other customers and the sound of old music playing from the jukebox. The smell of fresh coffee and fried food filled the air. It reminded her of the late nights on base when she and her team would sit together, laughing after a long mission. After finishing her meal, she left a tip, smiled at the waitress, and stepped outside. The air was cooler than before. She wrapped her jacket around herself and started walking toward her car. The city lights glowed softly against the dark sky, and for a brief moment everything seemed ordinary. But then something caught her attention. Across the street, near a convenience store, she saw a man standing close to the door, moving nervously. His hands fidgeted with something hidden inside his hoodie pocket. Another man was walking toward the entrance, unaware of what was about to happen. Danielle's instincts kicked in immediately. Years of training had sharpened her senses to notice details others might miss. The man's posture, his quick glances, the tension in his shoulders. Something was wrong. Within seconds, the man pulled out a weapon and shouted at the cashier inside. Danielle froze for half a breath, her mind calculating. There were people in there, innocent people. She could already hear someone screaming from inside the store. She didn't think twice. She reached for her phone and dialed 911. Her voice was steady, calm, professional. "This is Captain Danielle Carter," she said. "I'm off duty, but I'm witnessing an armed robbery on 7th and Oak Street. The suspect is wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. I'm in pursuit. Please send units immediately." "Ma'am, please stay back until officers arrive," the dispatcher replied quickly. "I can't," she said firmly. "He's getting away." As soon as she saw the suspect run out of the store with a bag clutched in his hand, she followed. She didn't have her weapon on her, just her phone and training, but she couldn't stand by and let him disappear into the night. The man sprinted across the street, knocking over a trash can as he turned down an alley. Danielle ran after him, her boots hitting the pavement hard. The sound of her footsteps echoed off the narrow walls. She was fast, but so was he. "Stop!" she shouted. "Police are coming, drop the bag." The suspect looked back for a split second, then pushed himself harder. He wasn't going to stop. Danielle's heart pounded as she chased him through the maze of alleys and side streets. She kept her phone in hand, updating the dispatcher whenever she could between breaths. "This is Captain Carter. I'm still in pursuit heading south past River Street." "Units are en route, ma'am. Please use caution," the dispatcher said. Danielle barely heard the reply. Her focus was locked on the suspect ahead of her. He stumbled slightly when he turned a corner, and she closed the distance. She could see his face now. Young, maybe in his 20s, scared but desperate. "Just stop," she called again, trying to reason with him. "It's not worth it." But he didn't listen. They crossed into a quieter part of the neighborhood, where the lights were dimmer and the streets empty. A stray dog barked from somewhere behind a fence. Danielle could hear her own breathing, steady and rhythmic despite the chase. Her training kept her focused. She knew help would arrive soon, but every second counted. If the man got into a car or disappeared into a building, it would take hours to find him again. Finally, near an abandoned parking lot, the suspect slowed down, turning sharply into another alley. Danielle followed carefully now, staying low, trying to use the shadows to her advantage. She could see him hiding behind a dumpster, catching his breath. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and spoke firmly but calmly. "Listen," she said, her voice echoing slightly off the walls. "You don't have to make this worse. The police are already on the way. Drop the bag and come out." There was silence for a moment. She could hear the faint sound of sirens far away, growing louder. The man looked around nervously. "Don't do anything stupid," Danielle said. "I'm not armed. I just want to help you end this the right way." The man hesitated. For a second it looked like he might surrender, but then the sound of approaching police sirens spooked him again. He turned and bolted out of the alley, trying to find another escape route. Danielle sighed and took off after him again. Her lungs burned now, but she kept going. When she turned the next corner, she spotted 2 police cars speeding toward them. Their lights flashed red and blue, painting the walls with color. Relief washed over her. Backup was finally here. She waved her hand and shouted, "He's heading this way. I'm the one who called it in. I'm pursuing the suspect." But the officers couldn't hear her clearly over the sirens. They stopped their cars quickly, stepping out with flashlights and weapons drawn, scanning the dark street. Danielle slowed down, raising her hand slightly so they could see she wasn't a threat. "Officer," she called again, her voice steady but loud. "I'm a military officer assisting." The suspect went toward the lot. One of the officers looked her way, but the flashing lights and chaos made it hard to read her expression. The suspect had disappeared again into the shadows. Danielle pointed in the direction he'd gone. "He's armed," she shouted. "He went that way." The police turned their attention back to the alley. One of them shouted commands to someone unseen. Danielle could hear the confusion in their voices. The sirens from another unit grew louder. The entire area was now filled with flashing lights, echoing shouts, and the rush of movement. She kept her distance, watching carefully, trying to see where the suspect might emerge. She could still hear faint footsteps. He was close. The officers began moving in formation toward the alley where Danielle had last seen the man. She followed a few steps behind, cautious but alert. She wanted to help, to make sure no one got hurt. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement, the suspect slipping through a side gate, trying to run again. "There!" she shouted, pointing. The officers turned instantly, lights flashing toward her and the gate. The scene became chaotic again, with shouting from multiple directions. Danielle ran toward the suspect, calling out once more for him to stop. She didn't know that in the confusion, not everyone understood who she was or what she was doing. The night air buzzed with tension, the kind that comes right before something changes everything. Danielle's focus stayed on the suspect, who was still trying to climb over a fence. Her only thought was to stop him before someone got hurt. She didn't see the looks exchanged between the officers. She didn't hear what they were saying over their radios. Her mind was locked on one simple mission: protect the innocent and stop the danger. As the sirens continued to echo through the streets, Danielle took another deep breath and prepared to move closer. She was tired, but she didn't slow down. Years of training had taught her that sometimes doing the right thing meant stepping forward even when things got confusing, even when it wasn't easy. Somewhere in the distance, she could already hear more police vehicles approaching. The sound of tires screeching, radios crackling, and voices shouting filled the air. Danielle looked once more toward the suspect, then at the officers moving in, and felt that familiar fire in her chest. This was why she had chosen to serve, to protect, to act when others hesitated. And as the night closed around them, the next few moments would test everything she believed about courage, trust, and justice. The flashing lights painted the night in red and blue, bouncing off windows and car hoods. The sirens had finally gone silent, but the sound still echoed faintly in the air. Danielle stood near the corner of the parking lot, breathing hard, her eyes fixed on the narrow alley where the suspect had disappeared. She had already told the dispatcher she was following the man. She had made it clear she was an off-duty military officer, assisting until the police arrived. But in the rush of the moment, not everyone had received that message clearly. The city police had been dealing with a string of robberies lately, and tensions were high. Every call tonight had the same energy: confusion, stress, and quick reactions. 2 police cars blocked the street. Officers stepped out, scanning the dark corners with flashlights. Their voices carried sharp tones of command, cutting through the night. Danielle raised her hand slightly, trying to show she meant no harm. "I'm the one who called it in," she said loudly. The suspect went through that alley. He's wearing a dark hoodie. One officer glanced at her but didn't respond. Another one spoke into his radio, giving directions. Danielle noticed their movements, the way they spread out, covering angles. It reminded her of tactical drills she had done hundreds of times. She stepped forward a little, just enough to see the alley more clearly. "I think he's still close," she said, her tone steady. The officers turned briefly toward her, their flashlights momentarily landing on her face. She blinked against the glare. "Ma'am, stay back," one of them said sharply. "I'm trained military," Danielle explained. "I'm unarmed. I can help contain him." The officer didn't answer. He just motioned her back again. She hesitated, then nodded slightly and stayed where she was. She knew the protocol. Too many people moving at once could make things messy. Still, something about the way the officers moved told her they didn't have a clear picture of who was who. The alley itself was narrow, with a fence at the end and a few dumpsters pushed against the wall. Danielle squinted, trying to spot movement. The wind rustled through a pile of papers near the curb. Somewhere deeper in the alley, she thought she heard a metallic sound, like a trash can lid shifting. Her instincts flared again. "He's still there," she said quietly, almost to herself. The officer closest to her signaled his partner, and they began to move forward. Danielle stayed a few steps back, her heartbeat steady but alert. She didn't like standing still when danger was nearby. Years in uniform had taught her that the longer hesitation lasted, the greater the risk. As the officers advanced, one of them radioed something in quick bursts of code. Danielle couldn't catch every word, but she understood enough. Backup was minutes away and the area was being locked down. Then a shout broke the silence. "He's running!" Danielle turned her head just in time to see the suspect dart from behind a dumpster, sprinting toward the open side street. Instinctively, she moved forward, pointing. "That's him!" she shouted. Everything happened fast after that. The officers turned at once, flashlights swinging wildly as they chased after the running figure. Danielle followed from behind, her legs burning but her focus sharp. She wanted to help to make sure no one else got hurt. The suspect had already proven desperate, and desperate people made unpredictable choices. As she ran, she called out again, "He's heading toward the lot. Stay to the right." The chase stretched out across the uneven pavement. The suspect was quick, but panic made him sloppy. He stumbled once, then recovered, glancing back over his shoulder. Danielle could see the fear in his movements. The officers were gaining on him now, shouting commands. "Stop, police! Drop it!" Danielle slowed slightly, keeping a safe distance but staying close enough to see. The flashing lights from the patrol cars illuminated everything in strobe-like bursts. The alley walls, the suspect's figure, and the officers in pursuit. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the dispatcher still on the line, but she didn't answer. Her focus was all forward. She could hear radios crackling and more cars arriving from other streets. Suddenly, one of the officers veered left, cutting through a side opening to block the suspect's path. Danielle saw it unfold and the man was trapped. He turned in confusion, unsure where to go. For a moment, everything slowed. Danielle stepped closer, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Listen," she called out to the suspect. "It's over. Don't run anymore. Just stop." He looked at her, eyes wide with fear. His breathing was ragged. "They're gonna shoot me," he muttered, shaking his head. "No one's going to hurt you," she said softly. "Put the bag down, hands up. That's all you have to do." The officers were shouting again, giving loud instructions. The suspect dropped the bag but didn't raise his hands fast enough. Tension filled the air. Danielle raised her hands too, hoping to calm everyone down. "Easy," she said to the officers. "He's surrendering." But in the confusion of flashing lights, sirens, and shouts, her words didn't seem to reach everyone. One officer turned toward her, his face tight, uncertain. In that split second, Danielle realized he hadn't recognized her. To him, she might have looked like another person running in the dark, someone connected to the chaos. "Officer, I'm the one who called this in," she said quickly, trying to make her voice carry. "I'm military off-duty. I'm assisting." The officer hesitated, eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of what was happening. His radio crackled again, blurring the words between commands. The other officers were still shouting at the suspect, who was frozen now, too scared to move. Danielle took a small step forward, pointing toward the suspect. "He's unarmed now. The weapon's gone!" The tension was unbearable. Everyone was on edge. The suspect's breathing, the hum of idling police engines, the distant voices from more arriving units, it all mixed into a chaotic rhythm. Then, one of the officers shouted something that Danielle didn't fully hear. She stopped moving instantly, raising her hands higher to show she wasn't a threat. "It's me," she said again, calmly but firmly. "I'm here to help." The officer in front of her seemed torn between focusing on her or the suspect. His flashlight beam wavered slightly. Another officer called out, trying to regain control of the scene. Danielle kept her tone even, doing what she'd been trained to do in moments of confusion. "Lower the tension. Keep everyone breathing. Look," she said, keeping her voice low but steady. "I just want this to end safely. That's all." The suspect dropped to his knees, finally raising both hands. The bag lay beside him. Danielle exhaled, relieved. She thought the worst part was over. But in the noise and confusion, a few of the new officers arriving didn't have the full story. Their radios had caught fragments of the dispatch. Armed robbery in progress. Suspect fleeing. Female on scene. Unclear if involved. The information was messy. From their perspective, the scene looked unpredictable. A woman standing near a suspect, both moving in a high-risk area. They didn't know Danielle had been the one who started the call. She turned as the new patrol cars pulled up, sirens cutting off abruptly. She raised her voice again, identifying herself. "I'm the reporting witness and an off-duty officer. The suspect's in custody." But her words blended with other voices, other noises. An officer shouted from behind one of the cars, "Who's she with?" Danielle turned slightly, hands still raised. "Military. I called this in." The lights were blinding now. Her eyes stung. The suspect was still kneeling nearby, silent and shaking. And in that moment, that split second of misunderstanding, everything balanced on the edge of confusion and fear. Danielle could feel the energy shift around her. The city that had felt so peaceful just hours earlier now pulsed with chaos. She wanted to believe it would all clear up soon, that someone would step forward and straighten things out. But deep down, something uneasy stirred in her chest. She had seen this kind of tension before, in combat zones, in split-second situations where people reacted faster than they thought. She knew how quickly things could spiral if communication failed. So she stayed still, calm, controlled, her voice steady. "I'm not a threat," she said again, more slowly this time. "I'm just trying to help." Her words hung in the air, but the scene around her was still in motion. Radios crackling, flashlights sweeping, new officers shouting to each other as they tried to figure out what was happening. The misunderstanding hadn't reached its breaking point yet, but the cracks were already showing, and in the flashing lights of that city street, with fear and noise surrounding her, Danielle could only hope that reason, and not panic, would decide what happened next. The night had grown colder, though no one seemed to notice. The flashing police lights still filled the air with color, washing the buildings and pavement in shades of red and blue. Danielle stood near the alley, her breath visible in the cool air, her hands raised slightly in front of her. Her heart was steady, but she could feel the tension in her chest. Everything around her felt like it was moving too fast and too slow at the same time. Officers were shouting to one another. Radios crackled with half-heard words, and somewhere nearby more sirens were approaching. The suspect was still kneeling on the ground near a dumpster, both hands in the air. His bag lay a few feet away. Danielle took a small step back, trying to keep her distance while still staying visible. She didn't want anyone to mistake her for a threat. She called out again, "It's clear. The suspect's done. Nobody's hurt." But the officers nearest to her didn't seem to hear. The noise, the lights, the confusion. It made communication hard. Everyone was reacting based on what they saw in front of them, not on what they knew. Two of the new officers, just arriving on the scene, looked uncertain. From their point of view, it was chaos. A woman near a suspect, both in motion when they arrived. The dispatcher's earlier call had said something about a female chasing an armed man, but it hadn't clearly explained who she was. That missing detail now hung over everything. Danielle kept her voice calm. "I called this in," she said again. "I'm the one who followed him. I'm off-duty military. The weapon's down. It's safe." She spoke clearly, but the words didn't seem to reach through the noise. One of the officers lifted a hand, signaling her to step back. "Ma'am, move away from the suspect," he called out. She nodded and started to move slowly backward, keeping her hands visible. "I understand. I'm just explaining what happened." The suspect, still on his knees, looked terrified. He kept glancing between her and the officers, his hands trembling. "I didn't mean—" he started, but no one seemed to listen. Danielle tried to keep her focus on the officers nearest to her. She knew from experience that moments like this could turn dangerous if anyone misunderstood anyone else's movement. "It's okay," she said softly, mostly to herself. "Stay calm. Just stay calm." More officers began to spread out, some circling the far end of the alley. Flashlights swung from every direction. Danielle turned slightly, still trying to stay visible, but her movement seemed to draw attention. One officer shouted, "Ma'am, stay where you are." "I'm not moving," she replied quickly, her voice steady. "I'm staying right here." But the shouting continued, mixed with instructions, overlapping radio chatter, and the hum of engines. In the confusion, it wasn't clear who was talking to whom. The scene had grown tangled. Too many voices, too many commands. Danielle lifted her ID slowly from her jacket pocket, holding it up high. "This is my identification," she said loudly. "I'm with the military. I called in the robbery." The nearest officer turned his flashlight on her again, the beam bright in her eyes. "Drop whatever's in your hand," he yelled. "It's my ID," she said, blinking against the light. "I'm just showing you—" "Drop it!" She froze, realizing he couldn't see what she was holding clearly. The flashlight glare made her silhouette hard to read. Her instincts told her not to argue. Slowly, she lowered her hand and let the ID fall to the ground. "I'm not armed," she said clearly. "I'm just trying to help." The officer hesitated. He looked uncertain now, his breathing quick. Danielle could see he was nervous, not angry, just unsure. The situation was spiraling faster than anyone could control. In that moment, Danielle thought back to her time overseas, to those times when communication broke down between soldiers and locals. A misunderstanding could happen in seconds if no one slowed down. That same feeling, the same uneasy weight, settled in her chest. The suspect moved slightly, adjusting his position on the ground. The officer shouted again for him to stay still. Danielle turned her head for a second, her eyes following the noise. "Don't move!" One officer yelled. "I'm not!" She called back instinctively, thinking the command was meant for her. But that moment, that tiny flicker of movement, that small turn of her body, made everything more confusing for the officers who had just arrived. They saw motion but didn't know why. They heard shouts but couldn't tell who was speaking. "Ma'am, don't reach," another officer shouted. Danielle froze again, hands up, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not reaching for anything. I'm standing still." Every breath she took felt heavy now. The air itself seemed to tighten. The lights flashed faster as more cars arrived, filling the narrow street. People were yelling from different angles, radios kept buzzing, and the entire scene had become a blur of noise and misunderstanding. Danielle took one small step back toward the open sidewalk, trying to move out of the tight space. "I'm just going to step into the light," she said gently, hoping it would make her easier to see. "So you can see my face." The officers looked tense, their flashlights following her every movement. The one closest to her lifted a hand, palm out. "Stop there!" She stopped instantly. "Okay, I'm not moving." For a moment it looked like things might calm down. The suspect was still. The shouting had lessened. And Danielle thought maybe, finally, someone would check the dispatcher's call and realize who she was. Then, another patrol car arrived from the far end of the block. Two new officers stepped out quickly, trying to assess the scene. They saw a woman standing near a suspect and several of their own officers shouting commands. To them, it looked like the danger hadn't passed. Danielle turned slightly toward them, raising her voice over the distance. "It's over. I'm the one who made the call. The suspect's down." The officers didn't respond right away. They had just arrived and were still taking in the chaos. The radio on one of their shoulders crackled again, words half cut by static. "Female involved, possibly armed. Unclear if suspect or witness." That single unclear message hung in the air like a shadow. Danielle saw the look of confusion cross one officer's face. She realized he didn't know who she was. She raised her hands higher, trying to explain again. "I'm with the military," she said loudly. "I called it in. Check with dispatch." But her words mixed with the noise. The new officers didn't respond. The air grew still again, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Danielle stayed frozen in place, her palms open, her eyes calm but alert. She spoke softly now, almost pleading for clarity. "Please," she said, "just listen for a second. This is a misunderstanding." One of the officers seemed to hesitate, glancing at his partner. There was so much movement, so much noise, that even the simplest communication felt impossible. In those few seconds, all Danielle could do was stay still and hope someone, anyone, would pause long enough to listen. The suspect on the ground whispered something she couldn't make out. The lights flashed again, blinding and sharp. Danielle closed her eyes briefly against the brightness. "Please," she repeated quietly. "I just want everyone to be safe." It was the last thing she said that night. The sound that followed wasn't loud compared to everything else happening. Just one sudden, shocking noise that cut through the air and left behind silence. The echo bounced off the walls of the alley, fading into the distance like a dropped stone sinking into water. For a moment, no one moved. The radios went quiet. The officers froze, their faces pale under the flashing lights. The suspect stared in disbelief, his mouth open but no sound coming out. The dispatcher's voice called faintly over one of the radios, asking for confirmation. No one answered right away. When someone finally did, their voice was shaking. In that moment, the city that had been full of noise and chaos became painfully still. Even the wind seemed to stop. The night had turned into something no one had intended. A misunderstanding, one that began with missing words and scattered information, had changed everything. And as the lights continued to flash against the dark sky, everyone on that street felt the same heavy silence settle over them. A silence that would follow them long after the night ended. The city woke up to sirens and headlines the next morning. What had happened the night before was already everywhere, on television, on people's phones, and in quiet whispers at coffee shops. Reporters gathered near the police station, microphones in hand, repeating the same few facts that had been confirmed so far. An off-duty military officer had been shot during a police response. The official statement was short, cautious, and filled with phrases like "under investigation" and "tragic misunderstanding." But the story behind those words was much deeper, one that would soon grip the entire city. At dawn, the streets were quiet. The sun rose slowly, lighting up the tall buildings and empty sidewalks. Near the site of the incident, flowers had already begun to appear. Someone had placed a small candle and a handwritten note. She tried to help. By mid-morning, the story had spread far beyond the neighborhood. News channels showed clips of the alley, the flashing lights and the police tape. Commentators spoke with somber voices, trying to piece together how something like this could happen. At home, Danielle's mother sat on her couch, clutching her daughter's photo in her hands. The picture showed Danielle in her military uniform, smiling with quiet pride. It had been taken the day she returned home from service. Her mother didn't speak much. The house was silent except for the faint sound of a reporter's voice on the TV. She always said she wanted to help. Her mother whispered softly. That's all she ever did. Outside, neighbors stopped by, leaving food and flowers, unsure of what else to do. The community had known Danielle for years, as the local girl who had gone off to serve her country and come back stronger than ever. To them, she wasn't just a headline. She was family. Later that day, a small crowd gathered near the police headquarters. Some carried signs that simply said "Justice for Danielle." Others stood quietly holding candles, praying. They weren't shouting or causing trouble, just standing together in disbelief. One woman in the crowd, who had once worked with Danielle at the youth center, spoke softly to a reporter. She was the kind of person who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. She didn't deserve this. At the police department, the mood was tense. Officers walked in and out without saying much. The chief gave a short press briefing, his expression serious. "This is a tragic event," he said. "Our hearts go out to the family. We are cooperating fully with the investigation." But outside, not everyone was satisfied. People wanted answers. How could a decorated officer, someone who had risked her life serving her country, lose her life while trying to help in her own city? That evening, candlelight vigils began across town. Hundreds gathered in silence, the air filled with soft murmurs and the glow of candles flickering in the wind. Someone played a slow melody on a violin and people bowed their heads. At the front of the crowd stood a framed photo of Danielle, surrounded by flowers, small flags, and handwritten notes. Some messages were simple: "You were brave. We will not forget. Thank you for your service." The local news covered the vigil, showing clips of people holding candles and wiping away tears. One reporter described it as a moment of unity in the middle of heartbreak. In the following days, more details began to surface. The dispatch recordings revealed that Danielle had clearly identified herself as an off-duty officer, and that she had been the one to call in the emergency. The timeline showed she had been following the suspect to prevent harm to others. When that information became public, the story changed. What had first been described as a tragic confusion now looked more like a failure to listen, to recognize, to see her for who she was. Newspapers published her story with headlines like, "A hero misunderstood," and "The officer who tried to do right." Across social media, people shared pictures of her in uniform, calling her a hero who had been taken too soon. Danielle's friends from the military posted long messages about her courage and kindness. They told stories about how she used to check on everyone after missions, how she always found a way to make people laugh even on hard days. She didn't believe in giving up, one of her old teammates wrote. Even when she was tired, she'd say, "We finish what we start." That was just who she was. At the youth center, the teenagers she mentored gathered in the gym, sitting in a circle with candles in the middle. None of them spoke for a long time. Finally, one of the older girls said quietly, "She told me once that real strength isn't about fighting, it's about helping." I didn't understand it then. I do now. The director of the center nodded, tears in his eyes. "She helped build this place," he said. "Her spirit's not gone. It's here, in every one of you." Meanwhile, investigators worked day and night reviewing footage, radio calls, and reports. They spoke with witnesses, with the officers involved, and with people who knew Danielle. Slowly, a clearer picture began to form. The conclusion was painful but undeniable. Mistakes had been made. Communication had failed. And at the heart of it all was a woman who had only wanted to protect others. When the findings were released, the chief of police stood before cameras again. This time his voice shook slightly as he read the statement. "This incident should never have happened," he said. "We extend our deepest apologies to the Carter family. We recognize her bravery and her service, and we will take every step to ensure this never happens again." The department announced changes to its communication system, new training programs, and a special review board, to handle incidents involving off-duty officers or military personnel. But for many, the reforms came too late. Danielle's funeral was held at the city's main church the following week. The pews were filled. Soldiers in uniform, police officers, community leaders, and everyday people who had been touched by her story. The air was heavy but respectful. A gentle rain fell outside as the service began. Her mother sat in the front row, surrounded by family. She held onto her daughter's folded flag, her eyes closed. One of Danielle's former commanding officers spoke first. She led with courage, he said. But more importantly, she led with heart. She believed that service didn't end when the uniform came off. Another speaker, a local pastor, said softly, "Some people live quietly and leave loud echoes when they're gone." Danielle was one of those people. Her actions will keep speaking for her. When the choir began to sing, the sound filled the entire church, soft, steady, and full of emotion. Outside, as the service ended, a long line of people waited to place flowers near her portrait. Soldiers saluted. Neighbors hugged one another. Some wept quietly. That night, the news showed the ceremony, calling it a citywide farewell to a hometown hero. But for those who had known her personally, it was more than that. It was a goodbye to someone who had changed lives simply by caring. In the days that followed, petitions circulated calling for an award in her honor. The mayor announced plans to rename a small park near her old neighborhood after her, a place where she used to jog every morning. And at the youth center, they unveiled a new scholarship program for young women interested in military or public service. They called it the Danielle Carter Leadership Award. Her mother attended the announcement, standing quietly as the crowd applauded. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, her voice soft but clear. "My daughter believed in doing what was right," she said, "even when it was hard, even when no one was watching. If you want to honor her, don't just remember her name. Remember her example." The room fell silent for a moment. Then the applause started again, slow and heartfelt. As the weeks passed, the story spread far beyond the city. News outlets across the country spoke of Danielle's courage, her service, and the lessons her story had left behind. People began using her name as a symbol of integrity, of the need to look twice, to listen better, to see the person behind the uniform, the skin, or the title. And though the pain of her loss lingered, so did something stronger. A quiet reminder that one person's courage can outlive tragedy, lighting the way for others long after the noise has faded. The city that once grieved now spoke her name with pride. Streets were safer. Training was changed. People paid more attention. Danielle's story had not ended in that alley. It had become something larger, a message carried forward by everyone who believed that justice wasn't about blame, but about learning to see one another more clearly. And in that truth, her spirit lived on, steady, brave, and unbroken. A year had passed since that night, the night that changed the city, the police department, and so many lives forever. Seasons had come and gone, but memories of Danielle were still alive in the hearts of those who knew her. It was early spring again, and the air carried that soft mix of warmth and chill. Trees along the park path had begun to bloom, their petals swaying gently in the wind. The park that once had no name was now called Carter Memorial Park. The new sign stood proudly near the entrance, surrounded by flowers and a flag that fluttered quietly above. That morning, people started gathering there for the first anniversary remembrance. Some wore their uniforms. Others came in simple clothes, holding flowers or candles. There was no press this time, no loud speeches, just people who wanted to remember her. Among the crowd was her mother, standing near the bench that had been placed in her daughter's honor. The bench was made of smooth oak with a small bronze plate on the back that read, "She lived to serve, and she served with love." Her mother ran her fingers over the engraved words, her eyes soft but strong. She had been through the hardest year of her life, yet she had found a way to keep going. Helping at the youth center had become her way of honoring her daughter. Every week she volunteered there, telling stories about kindness and courage. The young people listened. They loved hearing about the woman who had once guided them. The youth center itself had changed too. Inside, a large mural now covered one wall. It showed Danielle in her uniform, smiling, surrounded by bright colors and symbols of hope. A rising sun, open hands, and a dove in flight. The children had painted it themselves with help from local artists. Underneath the mural, bold letters spelled out, "Be the good you want to see." That phrase had come from something she once said to the kids. It had become their motto. Back at the park, the mayor gave a short speech, his voice calm and respectful. "Today isn't just about remembering what happened," he said. "It's about remembering who she was. A person who never stopped believing in doing what's right." Her story reminded us all that courage begins with listening and with love. People nodded quietly. A light wind moved through the crowd, rustling the small flags placed along the path. After the speech, everyone released white balloons into the sky. They floated upward slowly, carried by the breeze scattering against the blue. Some people whispered words as they let go. Her mother watched until the last balloon disappeared into the sunlight. Nearby, two of Danielle's closest friends from the military stood together, both wearing small medals pinned to their jackets. They had traveled from another state just to be there. One of them smiled faintly. "She'd probably laugh at all this," he said. "She never liked attention." The other nodded. "But she'd be proud of the difference she made." You can feel it, even now. They were right. The difference she had made was everywhere. After the incident, the city's police department had gone through major changes. Officers received new training that focused on de-escalation, communication, and community understanding. They practiced scenarios that taught them how to recognize and cooperate with off-duty personnel, military members, and civilians in emergencies. One officer later said, "We used to rush into scenes thinking we already knew what was happening. Now we stop, we listen, and we ask first, because one mistake can change a life, or take one." At the same time, the youth center had expanded its programs. It now offered mentorship opportunities for young people interested in law enforcement or the military, teaching them not just about discipline and duty, but about empathy, patience, and teamwork. The Danielle Carter Leadership Award had already been given to two recipients. The first was a quiet, determined girl who wanted to be a paramedic. The second was a young man who dreamed of becoming a pilot. Both of them had grown up hearing Danielle's story, and both said the same thing in their speeches. She showed us that helping others is what real strength means. As the year went on, her story became part of lessons taught in classrooms and leadership programs. Teachers used it to talk about courage, misunderstanding, and the importance of treating everyone with respect, no matter what they look like, where they come from. Her story even reached people she had never met. Letters came from across the country, from veterans, students, and families, all saying how deeply her story had touched them. Some wrote that they had decided to join the military because of her. Others said they had forgiven someone they once hated because they were inspired by her example. Her mother kept those letters in a wooden box by her bedside. Sometimes on quiet nights she would open it and read a few. They reminded her that her daughter's life still mattered, not just to her family, but to countless others. One evening, near sunset, she walked to the park alone. The air was cool, and the sky was streaked with pink and gold. She sat on the memorial bench, resting her hands on her lap, and listened to the birds singing in the trees. She smiled softly, speaking into the still air as if her daughter could hear her. "You see, baby," she said, "they remember you. They still talk about you every day. You didn't leave this world empty. You left it better." A gentle breeze brushed past her face, and for a moment she closed her eyes. She didn't need words. She felt peace, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Across the city, other small changes showed how much had shifted since that night. Police cars now carried a small sticker near their doors, a symbol of a dove and the word "respect" beneath it. Officers said it served as a quiet reminder of what they had learned from that tragedy. At schools, children were writing essays about community heroes, and many of them chose Danielle. They wrote about her bravery, her kindness, and how she had given her life trying to make her city safer. A teacher once said, "Stories like hers help us raise better people, people who listen, who care, and who think before they act." Months later, a new building was constructed near the youth center, a small, modern facility with classrooms and training rooms for public service volunteers. It was named the Carter Institute for Leadership and Peace Studies. Its goal was to prepare the next generation of leaders to build safer, fairer communities. During the opening ceremony, her mother was invited to cut the ribbon. She stood there holding the scissors, surrounded by young students and city officials. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. My daughter used to say that every day is a chance to do something good, she said. This place is proof that even when someone's gone, their goodness can keep growing. The crowd clapped, and some wiped away tears. Inside the new building, on the wall facing the entrance, there was a large quote from Danielle herself, taken from one of her journal entries found after her passing. It read, "The world changes one act of kindness at a time. You don't have to be famous or powerful. You just have to care." That quote became the foundation of the Institute's teachings. It wasn't just a building. It was a movement built around compassion, understanding, and courage. Over time, the pain of loss softened into something gentler: remembrance. People no longer spoke of her only with sadness but with pride and inspiration. Her story wasn't about tragedy anymore. It was about transformation. A year later, during a late summer afternoon, a young cadet at the police academy gave his graduation speech. He paused midway, looking at the crowd. "I joined because of someone I never met," he said. "A woman who showed me that wearing a uniform means more than authority. It means responsibility. It means protecting people with patience, not power." The audience stood and clapped. Her mother, sitting in the front row, smiled through her tears. As the years continued, her legacy grew quietly but steadily. Streets became safer. Officers were more thoughtful. The community trusted again. And in every corner of the city, people could see small reminders of her. The park, the mural, the scholarship, the dove symbol. Sometimes, children playing in the park would ask their parents, "Who was she?" And their parents would tell them, "She was someone who believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching." And that was enough. Because in the end, Danielle's story wasn't just about one night or one mistake. It was about what people chose to do afterward. It was about healing, learning, and building something better from pain. Her name became more than a memory. It became a promise, a reminder that kindness and courage can still shine even after the darkest night. As the sun set over the park once again, the last light of day touched the bronze plaque on her bench. It glowed softly, as if her spirit still lingered there, watching, guiding, protecting, and reminding everyone who passed by to keep choosing good. And though the years would continue to move forward, one thing would never fade: the quiet power of a life lived with purpose. Her story ended with peace, but her message, that courage means compassion, would live on forever.